I'm Cordell Anderson. I'll be your narrator for this video, which is part 2 of a trip made by Garth Norman, an archaeologist, and myself in February of 2017, first going to the Iztapa archaeological site in Mexico, which video we have already done, and now part 2, which is a trip up into the Alta Verapaz area of Guatemala, and specifically Valparaiso, where I lived and worked for many years. We've left Guatemala City and we're going down to what's called the Atlantic Highway, seeing typical views along the way, and seeing that it's very smoky this time of year as the Indians are burning in preparation for planting corn in May. We've seen the divided four-lane highway going down to the Atlantic coast, and then notice that in the lower part the road is still being worked on. Eventually it will be this nice four-lane highway all the way. Rancho, which is very hot country, and go up through these mountains that you see to the north, the Sierra de las Minas, but we're in hot cactus country, desert country, and we stopped for a little refreshment just before turning off to go up to Coban. And here's Sergio Navas and his son Abinadai. Sergio is our driver, and Abinadai is cooperating with Garth in his project, actually living in his home. But this nice young lady supplied us with some delicious banana splits. And now we're on our way up to the Alta Verapaz area and see a bus coming from that area. There's one of these buses that leaves Coban every hour. And we see all kinds of typical scenes along the way, things that never existed, of course, back in my day. But we're going up through some tough mountain country, first with cactus and thorn trees, and then the way we see fields of corn that were harvested from last year, and now the burning and preparation for planting in May, with fires seen frequently along with other beautiful scenes. But we're getting higher in the mountains now, and it's getting cooler. We're actually going through pine trees, and everything is fairly green now compared to what it was just down the road a little bit. We're now coming to an area, a junction, where the one road takes us to the Salimah Valley, which we'll see in just a minute, and the main road continues on to Coban. We stop at a point where we can look over the Salimah Valley, and Garth and companions go to get something cold to drink, and I take a few pictures of Salimah. The town that is closest to us is San Jeronimo, and it's up through these mountains that we have to go to get to Alta Verapaz, which means the high land of eternal peace. It was once known as the highland of eternal war, but these are scenes that we see all along the way, including dish antennas of a system which is very inexpensive, costing only about $10 a month for satellite TV. We're in coffee country also. See, of course, the Indians' fields of corn that are all done by hand on these slopes, and of course we see along the way tourist facilities, and we come to a very mountainous rainforest area, which is a national park for the quetzal bird, Guatemala's national bird, with trees covered with parasitical plants, many of them orchids. This here probably is an orchid. Now we're dropping down and seeing the rough mountains to the north, and in the Purala area. It's again this penny capitalism that most of Guatemalans have to live by. Once again, seeing the steep fields, mountains where the Indians grow their corns, some so steep that it's hard to imagine that it's even possible. But we go on and see some corn growing. This is their summer corn, and cattle. See Indian ladies all of a sudden in the typical dress, and go through this beautiful area where there are homes and their fields, and then there's plantations like this one here, owned actually by the owner of the Valparaiso plantation, which we will see in just a few minutes. Now we come to Pasmalon. You see the school here, which is the blue structure, where we've had, as a Guatemalan Foundation, projects for a number of times, as we have in almost all of these areas. Now we're coming to Tactic, a principal city in this area of the country, and the steep mountains that rise up to the, well, on both sides of Tactic, but mainly on the north. Proceed along with more restaurants and facilities for tourists, and here is there's a chance for some ice cream if we want to take it. But just up the road is Valparaiso. But we're going to go right on by right now and on to Santa Cruz, going by the Park Hotel. We'll get back to Valparaiso in just a few minutes. But we go on and stay at a hotel called San Rafael. Very nice little place. Wilfred, who is the manager, he told me the next day that his mother knows me, used to work for me during those years when I was at Valparaiso. We now go back to Santa Cruz and go in to look for my representative, Federico Vélez. He wasn't home, but we do see typical scenes in the commercial center of Santa Cruz. But our main objective is to get to the restaurant of Doña Nati. It was an old friend from over many years, but we had dinner at her restaurant and were charged 55 quetzales, which is only $7.50 each for four of us, which included a soda pop for each and a good dinner for an incredibly inexpensive price. Now we've gone back to Valparaiso, and we're at what's called the Crossroads of the Cid, or the Cruce del Cid, and that came from a sign that we put up there many years ago. It was there from like 1970 up until 1994. Most people today, well, I should say all people know it as the Cruce del Cid, but they do not know what CID stands for. And it's the Center for Indian Development, or the Centro Indígena de Desarrollo, which was the plantation during all the years that I owned and operated it. And here we have a panoramic view of Paradise Valley with the community we organized on the left that you'll see in just a minute. But just down the road a little ways, there's the school that we built in 1981, which now is not only a grade school with 400 students, but also a junior high school, which is incredible for rural Guatemala. And now we're going up the road towards the community and the plantation. At this junction, we're going to take the right-hand road that goes into the plantation. The junction we're at is actually about in left center of this picture, with the community on the left and a little series of ruins on the right. Low mounds, but which were determined by French archaeologists years ago to be the religious center of the area, and here we're seeing a little bit of it. We couldn't get in, go past the fence, and so this is just what you can see through the fence. In the middle that we're looking at right here, there's a low raised platform, and off to one side there was a hole. Here you see the site right in the middle of the picture. You'll have to look carefully to see it. And there's a ditch along one side, as you'll notice, and down on the flat land below there are some lines which we discovered were actually rock like footings for foundation or of a wall. And so this is a very important site, but and it was out of that hole that we pulled a Mayan altar, which I then carried with me when we later had to sell Valparaiso and had it at the entrance to our farm. And just by chance, Nephi was taking this picture of my son, and he just snapped the picture as Goku, our guard dog, was joined me in prayer. But here we are back to seeing the ruins, and a little bit off now we're going towards the west with a trench going through, and we'll mention trenches a little bit later, and then looking towards the dairy. And here's the entrance to the dairy, a dairy which I established years ago called Lecheria Las Victorias, but now they call it Lecheria Valparaiso. But in our day, this was our dairy that we operated there for many years, actually being the first ones in Guatemala to begin using plastic bags for the milk. You see in the hands of Maria del Carmen, who grew up with us in the central house and operated our store for many, many years. So now we're going over towards the central house and see one of our friends carrying his load of wood. You see they're very hard-working people, and this is the central house area, but this is the way it looked back in our day after we had fixed it up, because in the beginning of this central house area, which you now see is being rebuilt, it looked like this. It was a haunted house. We fixed it up though, and and drove out the ghosts and lived here for many years, as you'll see a little bit later. But now it's all been torn down, and a new structure is going up there, and we'll see what that's going to be in a year or so. The lake that we made in the beginning of our experience here still is there with the spillway and the drain system that we installed, but it has changed. This is what we had on the one edge, which was famous all over the area, with the plexiglass diving board and diving tower, change rooms, and a little waiting area for the children. But this is what's left of it today. So now we're swinging from the central house area towards the east, and we look up and see the Valparaiso community, which we established with a Mormon Chapel sort of overlooking the community. And now we're being greeted by children as we approach the community and drive up in there, seeing one of our old friends, Enrique La, who later became, after we had left there, became an LDS missionary in Ecuador. But it was his father that managed the dairy for us for many years. So here we are seeing other of our friends, and Pablo Shana, who came out to greet us along with others, and he was a very key person for many years. In fact, during all my years at Valparaiso, he was one of my first students, and then played a very, very important role for many years. 19th of February, our plan was to be at a meeting of the LDS Church, just to be able to see a lot of our old friends. And in that sacrament meeting of what is now a ward, it was presided over by a little boy. We always called him Moncho. Is now Bishop Moncho, I guess we'll have to say. His whole name is actor Victor Ramon Yat Valdez. And so we attended the meeting. There wasn't an empty chair in the chapel. 152 people were there. But there we met an old friend, Ken Karchner, who I met on one of my pioneer timberslide explorations 4 or 5 years ago. And we've been good friends ever since. And since then, he and his wife, Marianne, have been volunteers at the Chula Cooperative Plantation, very, very remote from here. It must have taken him 8 to 10 hours on a bus to get here, to just be with us for a few hours. After meeting, we zoom in on the central house area and the lake, and we can see that they built a new dam. There will be another lake up above, and then there's a lake on the right that we built too. My daughter Aura met us there and went with us on an exploration down into the Chicxoy Canyon. She is the one who is working on her master's degree, which she hopes to finish this year, in social work. But we drove up first through the plantation, seeing their water tank and area which they are renting to the people called Palencianos, where they're harvesting potatoes right now. On the other side of the road, where there used to be a hill, there's a deep ravine, and the road is in danger of being washed away. But it was on that hill where we built our water tank, which had a capacity for, I think, 20,000 gallons. Maybe it was more than that. But here we are going down towards the Chicxoy Canyon, a very deep canyon. And here's where there's a hydroelectric project. And here's a junction where there are 2 different roads you can take to it. And I would take the left one back in 1980 to be able to drive at night, and about at 9 o'clock on my car radio I could pick up Utah Jazz basketball games, here like the last quarter of each game. It was guerrilla territory, so I'm known as the jazz fan who risked most his life to listen to a little bit of the jazz games once in a while. And so that's here we're seeing the sign that the government has put up about the Hydroelectric Project. So now we'll start going down into the canyon, and we'll just kind of move along quickly here. There's a little village along the way where they're preparing their marimba for their religious service on Sunday. And now we're down seeing the Chicxoy River, which is very low right now because they're retaining water in the dam. But this river begins far away in the central highlands of Guatemala, near Santa Cruz del Quiché, where it's called the Rio Negro. And then later it changes to the Rio Sacapulas, and then it becomes the Rio Chicxoy, and then downstream other rivers join it, and it becomes the mighty Isumacinta River, which forms the border with Mexico, and goes on down into to empty into the Gulf of Mexico. So now we're seeing these rough mountains, which were a real barrier to travel in ancient times, and they're still a barrier to travel. But this is what some today, like Garth and other LDS archaeologists, they call this the River Sidon, which we'll have to explain later on. And here's a typical bird, a buzzard. Now we're down in the bottom, going upstream, looking at the rough mountains on both sides of us. And then we soon come to a store, but we're looking towards the north, and this is the mountain in the distance. There is on the north side of San Cristobal, and it's a mountain chain that forms this great barrier that I mentioned. But at the store, I of course am most interested in getting a cold drink, and so I get one and see some of their present harvest of summer corn, and a little cooking going on. But Ken and Garth are interested in looking up off to the east, this canyon, and I was able to find out that there is a pathway coming down that canyon, but it's a very, very rough path. And the upper part of it I have been down, and back in the day when we had to chase cattle rustlers down the trail coming down into the canyon. Now we're looking up again, traveling towards the dam. They stopped to look down at the river, which is very low. We thought we were seeing fish down there, but they're not. And then we come to the dam, but cannot get through without authorization. There are two guards there of this Hydroelectric Project, which forms a lake about 50 miles long. And then we look up another side canyon going to the east, where once again there is a path, a very rough, little-used path that goes up through these mountains. And this is zooming in on the pass. Now we're back at Valparaiso at that junction, and we have invited to have lunch at Elvira's home. She's a miracle baby who actually helped get the work started at Valparaiso when she died as a baby after a medical treatment for the whole community, and through prayer she came alive again. So we were invited to have lunch at her home. Ken has gone back to Chulac, and here we are, myself and Garth, Federico Bellis, and my daughter Aura, and one of Elvira's grandchildren, another grandchild, and a daughter. And then we go on into the community and get a picture of Pablo Chana, who we've seen already. On his right are two of his daughters, Ermelinda and Gloria, and then on the left and on the right are two of Ermelinda's daughters. And then we stop to say hello to more friends. This is the home of Macaria and Mariano Cal, a daughter and a granddaughter. And then we go on to the Communal Hall, and we're getting ready for the meeting with the whole community. But something's going on back up the road. There seemed to be some tourists, and we couldn't quite see who they were. But all of a sudden, Hal Polson walks in. Hal's been a friend since 1976, when him and his wife Neva and Jeannie spent 6 months with us after the 1976 earthquake that killed 25,000 Guatemalans. Hal has been one of the main contributors to the foundation since, and for a number of years has been a trustee on the foundation board. So it was a shock seeing them all of a sudden with us there, and they couldn't stay long, and I was so surprised seeing them that I didn't get a shot of them, a picture of them. But here he gave me this picture that they took along with Moncho, Bishop Moncho, that you see in this picture. So Jeannie is the one behind Moncho, and then her husband and their two daughters, and then behind Hal and Neva is Andy, one of the two little babies that they adopted in 1976 when they were with us. This might be is a picture that people might remember a little bit better, Hal, when he and Janie were with us, along with Neva, of course. Now back to the Communal Hall, and I'm getting ready to give my remarks to the people. I'm happy to be with all of you, to whom I dedicated many of the happiest years of my life, doing my darndest to help you have a better life that we called the good life, treating hundreds of you for sickness, saving many, but sadly losing some, as I was just learning how to treat the sick in your area. One famous picture of me has me and my little daughter Julie, who helped me, and at 10 years old was giving shots. In the picture, we were trying to save Leek and Alfonso's mother, but she was too sick and died. Then we were given Tomas, who was dying, and I tried to save him, first giving him a blessing of life, but then one night in the outhouse, the Lord made me feel he should go home, and so I went and knelt down, releasing him from the blessing, and in the morning he was gone. My family invited all of you to a religious service. The first at Valparaiso, 160 came. Then in Santa Cruz, I helped Ricardo, the father, dig the hole, and some of you said it was the first time you'd ever seen a landowner who cared about them. Soon Ricardo brought us Leek and Alfonso to keep them alive and raise them. So soon our family grew to 30 and more. We're giving of our lives for you, our friends, and the Central House family grew, then grew more. Here we see one of the children that grew up with us. We called him Moncho. Today he's Bishop Moncho. But our whole philosophy was to live with you as brothers and sisters. And here you see two of my children, David and Richard, walking down the road, arm in arm with their barefoot brother, Ruben. My practice to visit and be with you in your homes and eat with you. And then, of course, there's the case of Marcela, which we give and I give next. Marcela, who is here today, got sick, and day after day I tried to save her, even sleeping in the rancho to give her the medicine on time. Then I was getting sick too, but finally learned we had typhoid, and I ran to town for the right antibiotic, and we were both saved. Soon I realized all of you had to learn important lessons. I started showing you pictures of great ruins, telling you that you were descendants of a great people and that you could become great again. But I taught you that your sacred book, the Popol Vuh, said that your ancestors lost the original sacred book, and then a great darkness came upon you, bringing many problems. So I began teaching you the principles that you had to understand to be able to solve your problems. That would help some again to have your original book to guide you. So the principles that we taught were put into displays in our what we called the Cultural Hall. We taught you principles which we called the principles of the good life, which are those that you'll see on the screen, with which you could overcome your problems and begin having what we called the good life. And so here are those principles. My friend Garth Norman, an archaeologist, and I just came from Izapa, Mexico, an ancient city where is found the Tree of Life monument that shows one of your ancestors who was a prophet teaching on one side of the tree. On the other side, a young man teaching too, but also writing your original sacred book. The Popol Vuh, which Mayans from Guatemala today believe is their sacred book, says the original book was lost or hidden, and that in that book it tells how your ancestors came across the ocean guided by the old prophet, and they arrived near Izapa on Guatemala's south coast. Later, there was a fight amongst them, and those who followed the young prophet took refuge in the mountains, which we consider are Guatemala's Central Highlands, where they lived for 200 years. They then fled from their enemies following a big river, today called the Chixoy. and they came up to Alta Verapaz and spread north into the Petén. Alta Verapaz was called the land of Manti, and farther north Zarahemla. In the wars, they fortified their cities, digging around them a deep trench, and on the inside a wall of timbers. Now to 1968, I became the owner of Valparaiso, and accepted all of you as my brothers and sisters. There was a trench all around Valparaiso, and others coming down to the valley. And the area where we finally had our soccer field was surrounded by one of the ancient trenches, though we didn't know what they were. One reason is that the modern book, which we consider the sacred book of the Indians, has a mistranslation. The word ditch in English is translated in Spanish as foso or fosa, instead of using the word that is understood, zanjas. And so the Spanish-speaking world just has not understood the importance of these fortification trenches. In the beginning, there were 2 French archaeologists that came and explored the area across the road from here and said it had been the religious center from 400 BC to 150 AD. In 1979, an archaeologist, gringo, Rick Hauk, came and explored and told us that Valparaiso had been an ancient fortified city protected by trenches. I had talked at that time to 2 old men, one Felipe La's father, and they told me about their ancestors being visited by a white bearded creator god who taught them to love each other and live righteously. So we put up a sign on the ruins. What did it say? Yes, the ruins of the Holy One, or the ruins, las ruinas de Nahual Huinac. Valparaiso is a sacred place, and you are blessed to live in it. And with the help of my friend Garth, I have learned that Izapa is connected to Valparaiso, both being ancient cities when your ancestors were righteous and blessed. At Izapa, we now have a visitor center, and the Ancient America Foundation wants to explore and excavate here too, and learn more about your great ancestors, and one day hope to do what I dreamed of years ago, build a Mayan cultural center and archaeological museum. Here's a drawing I made 17 years ago of what we want to build here, with a museum like the one I built in the central house that you see here, and then later at my farm of the Holy One, or La Finca de Nahual Huinac. Do you remember? I had in front an altar I took from the ruins here, and you see me praying over it with my dog Goku. We still have the artifacts, and we want to have them in the cultural center and museum. And just as some of you trusted me years ago and brought me some artifacts, we hope you'll help us again that way when we're able to return. I then introduced Garth Norman, who in 1966, a year before I moved to Guatemala, we had gone on an archaeological expedition together in my pickup truck, and we were able to get at the Izapa site the first good photographs of that site. You see Garth here in the back of my pickup truck looking at some of the negatives which I had developed. But Garth began speaking, explaining his purposes, which was to help the people understand their history and their heritage, and to be able to appreciate more who they were and how great they could become by living proper principles. But as I was translating for Garth, a suggestion was given that there was a young man who understood English well, who could translate directly into Pocomchi, and so Oscar Kaal started translating for Garth, and everybody sort of came alive and really paid attention to what Garth had to say, and then I took over afterwards to say thanks to everybody with a few parting words, and then I prepared or showed them that I had some things, printed matter to pass out to them that would help them understand better what we were talking about. Some pictures were taken of old friends. Alfonso, who was one of the dirty little boys that was given to us in the beginning, and has grown up, of course, to become a great young man. And then a picture of me with Felisa, who also was one of the first that came to be with us, along with her sister and her brother, living and grew up in the central house, and now she's here with her children, with Teresa, with Guayo, with Florinda, and with Susana. So here, there's a picture of me with them, but I got ready some materials that I was going to leave with the leaders of the community and also with Bishop Moncho to distribute among the people. So then the meeting was over. Ben and I saying goodbye to everybody, and we made a very quick trip to Coban. I said goodbye to my daughter Aura and to Chapina. They lived together. Chapina was another that grew up in the central house. And then we're on our way. On the way back to Guatemala City, we stopped to look up where the property line from Valparaiso used to come down from that saddle, and then it cornered out and crossed the highway. And there's this little section that you see here, Garth, walking up into, that apparently still belongs to me. This is a property line on the other side of that curve, and this looking up, and so this little end of the hill, apparently it still belongs to me. And then we drive to the Cruce del Cid, the crossroads of the Cid, and we go up into a little area on the east side of the highway, which is also part of the community which I established back in 1981 and 82. And Domingo here, who's taking care of this nursery, I guess we could call it, took us up the hill to visit his sister, who we always called Marieta, where they get water from the Valparaiso potable water system, but up high on the hill they do not get any kind of pressure until the evening when everybody else has sort of gone to bed, and so that's when they fill up their containers to have water during the day. But this is Marieta, her mother Agapita, Brother Domingo, and one of Domingo's sons, looking into their little living room. And so this is Marieta, who had a stroke a couple of years ago, and we're helping her by getting her an exercise gadget or machine to help her in her therapy. But we climbed up above their place on the property line, and it was from up here where I took this panorama of the valley. And this is zooming in on the community, and then we walked back down the hill and around to a big curve in the highway to the north. And here you can see the property line coming diagonally down across the picture, and this is looking up, seeing actually a portion of what was one of the fortification trenches. And then on the other side of the highway, if you look carefully, you can see it going up through the pine trees. But from there we headed back to Guatemala City, seeing all the typical sights again, and of course everybody has their cell phone glued to their ears. So we say goodbye to going up the Atlantic Highway, looking back at the Sierra de las Minas that would just come through, and we're back at Sergio's home to spend the evening in preparation for flight out the next day. And we were taken care of beautifully by his wife. And their home was a pleasure to be in, with artifacts of the ancient culture all around in their living room, tikal, and of course we can say this is the Holy One, the legend of Nahual Huinac.